What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. After I dropped that track yesterday, I got several questions concerning my favorite plugins. They were essentially, what are your favorite plugins for 2024? But these are just my overall favorite plugins, the ones I use on every single mix. And so I'll show you around some simple categories: compressors, saturation, channel strip stuff, some analog emulation, and of course, delay and reverbs. Let's get into the compressor stuff here, and we're just going to whip through this. So number one here is this AMEC. It's a mastering compressor. Listen, this isn't exactly what I would call an aggressive sort of profile with respect to dynamics, but what this thing does do is shape your sound and add an absolutely pristine level of top end. So if you don't want to do a big monster sort of like high end shelf, or use saturation, if you will, to basically get the high end, I've been using this thing. You just drive the threshold kind of situation and dial in the peak and the fast ones, and oh my God, it just basically, your mix comes alive. So it's a really, really, really incredibly useful plugin to get, like a really sort of well-defined top end on your mix without actually having to use either saturation or, like I said, an EQ scenario. So that's what I use this for. Fantastic kind of situation. Next is this Townhouse bus compressor. This is basically my version of the SSL Master 2 bus. Very useful, of course, for most situations, but for the most part, it sits on my 2 bus here, and I just basically have very sort of relaxed settings kind of situation. And it works great. I don't know what this Rate S sort of thing does, but again, it adds an extra little sort of like top end to your mix and stuff, and it's very, very useful, very useful. You're like, I need just a bit more, and you're just like, whoop, up to about 4 or 5, and bam, there's that beautiful top end you've been looking for to really make your mix cut. So next on the list here is this Elysia Alpha Master. This is my number one go-to compressor. I use it on everything: guitars, bass, vocals. It's just so incredibly useful. You have the standard sort of functionality, although I have to admit the ratio thing is a little bit weird. I mean, you can go up to about 2 to 1 kind of thing, and then just drive the threshold, and you'll see the compressor just absolutely crush the signal. But by turning up the gain a little bit, you're like, it doesn't really destroy the signal, if you will. Like, you're not, and it's not like a normal compressor where you can just squash it to the point where it's almost meaningless. This thing always stays musical, so it's almost like a tone shaping tool. And of course, you have the high-low pass here. You have a Nevo filter over here. You've got this extra level of functionality with either the standard type compressor configuration or the feed forward, and then there's 2 more of these auto fast ones that are in addition to the attack and release functionality. So once you set the attack, you can do this auto fast. It adds like another element to the attack. I'm not going to get into it, doesn't really matter. It's got and so incredibly useful mid-side functionality. You've got soft clipping and whatnot. It's just fantastic. This is for $20. This will be one of the most used plugins you use for compression, dynamics, and for tone shaping. Just fantastic. For multi-band compression, another thing I'm really big on, these 2 Lindells here are absolutely gold. This one here has got a very sort of like analog type feel, and of course, since I really want my recordings to sound more like the late 70s and the early 80s, when we had that really big analog sound, it was warm and sort of fat bottomed. This thing basically is killer for that. There's a really annoying frequency that's driving you mental. Bada bing, bada boom. You can just dial it right in here with the crossover, right? Crank up the gain a bit and then just eliminate it. It's got a ton of functionality and all the rest of that stuff. It's just absolutely fantastic. I use it all the time. Great for de-essing too, by the way, as weird as that sounds. Another sort of multi-band compressor. Nice. I can't even get the words out here. Multi-band compressor here. In this case, a little more sort of like stripped down, but this compressor in and of itself is absolutely fantastic. The MU66 it is. I don't know what to say. For sort of analog recordings and stuff like that, you can't ask for much more. It's got all the basic functionality and all the rest of that stuff, and it just sounds killer. You know, now listen, it takes a little bit of finessing to get used to because of the way that it works with the adjustable zero, and then you have an adjustable slope here, your total harmonic distortion, the crossover range, you know, the sort of the high pass filter here for just bypassing when the actual compressor kicks in and whatnot. But overall, this thing is incredibly powerful and useful, and an absolutely sick piece of gear to have in your arsenal. For plugins, this one here, if you're going to get any, this one, the master, and the mastering compressor here, this AMEC, are the three top ones. Of course, you can get a whole bunch of versions of like the SSL version. This is Brainworks, is essentially the townhouse bus one. And there's lots of versions of like a multi-band compressor. I just happen to like this one because it's more sort of analog rather than sort of like the digital precision. It adds a certain level of color and fatness to it. So it's really great. Next on the list here is saturation. I slept on this one, the Loop Trotter, for a long time, but I didn't realize the magic here button is a secret sort of like producer weapon kind of situation. This thing sounds amazing on keyboards. It works great on vocals. It's awesome on acoustic guitars and stuff. Lots of functionality. The density function and the mono maker alone really, really help in terms of shaping your mix and making sure that you're targeting the saturation, if you will, in the appropriate sort of area of your mix, so you don't just obliterate stuff. And again, left, right, and mid side. So you can't ask for more, honestly. And then of course it's got this extra functionality here, the TMT, which is basically, in my opinion, it's like cycling through a whole bunch of channels on a console, you know, like an SSL or whatever it is. It gives you slightly different sort of sound profile. Here's a quick tip. Instead of doing this thing at the end, which I've seen a lot of people do, leave everything at 0, right? And sort of set it up that way and dial in this bottom section, especially this TMT, get the channel that you're like, okay, that sounds the best to me with respect to, you know, adding a little extra mojo to your sound. And then of course, just start engaging the other functions after. Done. And don't forget to set the sort of input output range. Another one, a lot of times people are like really driving it up here into the, you know, -12 to say +3 range. You have to be careful. Sometimes you only want to be around the -30. And I find that most of these things, they work best between like -24 and -12. So that's really the sweet spot with a lot of these plugins, is the -24 to -12 range. And then what you can do is just drive the output. Don't try to make it louder by driving the input level. It's just going to destroy your mix. Instead, get a reasonable level here, make this device, you know, virtually speaking, work, and then drive the output here, and you'll be like, wow, spectacular results. Next here is this, I guess it's Louder Than Liftoff is the name of the company. Silver Bullet. Basically what this is let's see here. It's essentially the saturation of an SSL board and a Neve board built into a plugin. You might have seen guys like Jason Joshua and stuff. They run like a hybrid setup where they have a digital workstation, but it runs through an SSL board. Well, this thing kind of does the same situation. It is a really, really killer piece of gear. This is on my mastering chain. It is awesome. It adds all of the extra love that you need to really get your mixes to sound big and fat and just destructive, right? And this little extra EQ section, especially the air and the low end here, are incredibly useful. And the last sort of like thing is you have a whole bunch of different sort of models to draw from, if you will, to get the perfect amount of saturation. Now, I usually use it on the Hitmaker 4000 because essentially I'm using it on my master track, but you can use this in any sort of regular context with any instrument, and then just start railing, you know, the gain and whatnot with respect to whatever the thing is here. You can see that's what is that one? The A one is the SSL. That's, I think it stands for American, and then the N is the Neve, right, which I believe is British. And then you can do the SSL into the Neve and then output that way, or vice versa, Neve into the SSL. So it's like saturation going into more saturation and out. You might be like, what? But trust me, this thing is a secret weapon. And I slept on it for quite some time. I mean, I had the plugin, but I was like, I don't know how to use it. And I'm going to say this up front. I like to pick one or two companies and stuff. You'll notice this. I use a lot of plugin alliance stuff because it takes months, if not years, to properly learn how to use these things and in which situation. There's the right tool for the right job. And although you can use this on pretty much almost anything, you want to sort of like maximize the bang for your buck kind of deal. So this one here is an absolute must in my opinion. My favorite all around sort of like saturation tool that I use quite a bit just when I want to throw it on a track and stuff is this one here, the Big Al. It's by Neold. Again, Plugin Alliance. It's got a whole bunch of functionality here by putting in these pins and using the drive function. There's the low end, there's a high end. I have a more sophisticated version of this one called the Wunderlich. I didn't put it on there because it's a little bit more intensive, but another worthy substitute for this. This one here is just, it's small, it's lightweight, it gets the job done, and it sounds amazing. And of course, you have all kinds of extra little juiciness here by just doing the right configuration. Sometimes you don't even need to touch the controls. You just want to throw on two of these and whatever, and just run it through there, and you're getting exactly what you want. It's got great high end. It's got a really nice low bell, essentially, for this low end stuff. And the drive is pretty clean. Like you can go pretty savage into the 30s and stuff before you really start to get, saucy with it. So this is a great plugin all around. Next here is this Vertigo. This is saturation that I use on my Master 2 bus, on the Masters and stuff like that. It's just ridiculously customizable, let's put it that way. Now, this is not a plugin that you just kind of jump into. I think it took me 6 months before I even got it to work properly with a sound that I was like, yeah, that sounds good. So, it's not for the faint of heart, but if you're looking for something that has like the absolute maximum level of customization, you will not find a better plugin than this one here for saturation. It basically does everything. Although I will say this, there's a new one out with respect to the black box, which is incredibly popular and famous, that now does the saturation in terms of each band, and they have like 6 bands. So I would imagine that is going to replace this, because saturating individual sort of like sections of your mix is again another secret weapon kind of situation. So this one is what I use right now, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be moving over to the updated black box one, which is even more sick. Next is the channel strips here. So let's go to the first one here. This AMEC 9099. This is probably the most complete channel strip you'll ever get. Now it's expensive, but you can get them on sale. Everything that you're seeing here, you can get on sale from Plugin Alliance. You can get 4 plugins for about 60 or 70 bucks American, which is ridiculous. So just wait around and grab yourself channel strips. At first I was like, okay, why did I buy all these? And then I started to realize very quickly that if you use these on certain aspects of your mix, you gain a whole bunch of new control, especially if you're doing compression and then you want to just add an extra little bit more compression kind of situation. But this plugin here is absolutely devastating. It's one of my most favorite with respect to just throwing on a channel strip to anything. If I'm going for a channel strip, it's this one or the SSL 4000, what we'll look at in a minute. But this one on drums, on bass, on guitars, totally unbeatable. Next is this more niche one, this Focusrite. This is excellent, and I brought it up here for acoustic instruments and clean guitars. This cannot be rivaled, okay? Don't ask me why, and it's mostly because of this little functionality down here. I'm not really sure. It's like routing for the filtration of the, going from, the de-esser and this compression unit into the gate. You can do all kinds of really fancy stuff with it here, even though it doesn't look that fancy. and it's just phenomenal. The one major downside is, of course, once you get to the top and low end stuff, you're basically shoved into a situation where you can only select certain frequency ranges, and that may not always work out great. But overall, you don't have to worry about that as much with acoustic instruments, so you can kind of get away with it. But this is a fantastic plugin. I've used it many, many, many times. And like I said, this lives on all of my acoustic instruments. I use the 9000 and now, of course, the SSL 4000 here, the G series one. Again, Plugin Alliance, love it because, again, it has the E and the G here. Of course, it does. I think it's the same thing here. Now, I don't know what the difference is between these, but it's really nice to actually have the choice of switching between EQ types. And I have used this on a regular basis. It's one of the first things I do when I engage the EQ is see like, oh, does that sound better or does this sound better? So phenomenal. One thing I will say is a lot of the Plugin Alliance stuff comes with this selector up here, okay, the ABCD, which gives you 4 different profiles. And in Reaper here, I can actually drop that off. And I think it's under the settings one here, right? So if I were to drop that as the track control kind of deal, it lets me select in real time which one I'm doing. So for instance, if I'm running one sort of instrument in one situation, I may want to have one sort of configuration on this channel strip. And then when I'm like, well, it doesn't really work at like, you know, later on in the song, there's something wrong there, I can just immediately switch to another one and re-EQ using the exact same plugin. This saves a massive amount of time. It saves a massive amount of processing power, and you only have to run one plugin. So you only have to do sort of click on one thing kind of situation and get everything you need there. And again, there's all kinds of extra juiciness in here with the compressor and the expander and stuff. It's just, this is my #1 go-to plugin for channel strip stuff. It's pretty much the go-to plugin for almost all sort of like hard rock and metal guys or whatever else it is, because it's tried and true. And this is one of the granddaddies. There's another one too, obviously, the E-type that looks black and stuff, but I find the E-type doesn't quite sound as juicy as this G-type, but it's obviously preference. Next on the list here is this 80 channel or whatever, 80 series, if you will, by Lindell. I think it's a Neve. This is, again, fantastic. There's another one too called the 69, of course, insert laughter as you see fit, which is very similar, slightly different. Again, another sort of analog configuration. But when you're talking about just get stuff done, I usually drop this one, the AMEC 9009, and the SSL 4000 into a track where I want to add the channel strip, and I just immediately start selecting which one I want to see what it sounds like when it just runs through the plugin on itself, you know, without actually tweaking any of the parameters. And whichever one I feel sounds the best just out of the box kind of deal. And usually I have a setup where there's nothing on. Absolutely nothing is on. No filters, no EQ, nothing. It just runs through essentially the preamp here. And you'd be surprised at like, wow, okay, definitely want to be using the SSL or the Focusrite in this case. And that's why it's really important to basically start building up a small library, if you will, of about, I'd say 6 or 7 of these bad boys. There's at least that many configurations. I have at least 10. So, and a lot of obscure ones too, like the N channel one, which is like a hybrid one. It's pretty weird. It's a great one. And there's some other ones in there too. Now, this one is not exactly a channel strip, but I use this a lot. This is one of my favorite plugins of all time. It's the SPL Vitalizer. Don't ask me what half of this stuff does. I just start working left to right. There's a, you know, like the drive function, basically top end. This shapes the bass to a really tight bass to being a little bit more open kind of situation. It has onboard compression, very light. This is basically a crossover point. This process sort of like dials in a certain amount of crispiness and high end and whatnot. And then you can sort of focus that using this, again, high-end crossover sort of situation. And then the intensity, again, is like another sort of trebly / high-end sort of functionality and whatnot. Either way, it's got the various selectors here, and the way that this plugin works is just, I don't know, it's voodoo. It's absolutely, it's $20 too. I'm telling you, this as one of the final plugins on your guitar chain will allow you to dial in some absolutely crushing guitar tones. And again, you're going to be hard pressed to find a plugin that does it with such a simple interface. It works every time, and it works on every stringed instrument almost flawlessly. Basically bass guitar, electric guitars, both distorted and clean, classical guitars or acoustic instruments. You cannot go wrong with this. It is essentially a perfect plugin. I just wish they would make an updated version according to the MK3. If I was ever going to buy a piece of gear, the MK3, which is the actual hardware version, I would buy that in 2 seconds. It's that good. This thing is absolutely ridiculous. So that's the channel strip stuff. Let's move on to the analog stuff. First off, I just picked this one up. It's a better maker. I know this is kind of like essentially a Pultic, but this thing is amazing. That's all there is to say. Fantastic. This is a go-to plugin for my drum bus. Okay, the low end boost here is going to make your kick sound absolutely ridiculous. Okay, there is no, I've not found another plugin that can actually make a kick drum sound more punishing. In fact, if you take it to an extreme, that's all you'll hear is kick drum, because this thing just, it's got legs for miles. So I love it. There's a whole bunch of extra functionality too. You can kind of see how it works in a parametric sense. When you're doing that is an incredibly useful function, you know what I mean? And then you can just sort of make adjustments as necessary, or decouple them, of course. And it actually teaches you a lot about audio production by having this visual sort of representation here. It's a fantastic plugin. I highly recommend it. If you're going to do a Pultic kind of deal, this is definitely one that you should have. My next here, and these are two of the same, here, this black one and the blue one here, these are peak limiters. It's sort of like what I would call a music focuser, and on top of that, it's also kind of acts like compression, because it's a peak limiter compressor, of course. The thing is I drive the input gain, I drop the output out like this. I usually have the ratio between 3 and 7 with a relatively fast attack and a sort of like relatively slow release. Sometimes faster, depend, but a lot of times I'm over here in the 1.5 range. Don't ask me. Again, we got some voodoo action going on here. It just cleans up the signal. It tightens up all the mechanics. It makes it punchier, more impactful. And I mean, I saw this plugin for $10 yesterday. You can buy Black Rooster's entire plugin suite right now, I think for $99, which is about 20 plugins, and they're all killer. They are all killer. I use only this company when it comes to like analog emulation. I absolutely love it, and there are no complaints whatsoever. Lightweight, you can use hundreds of these plugins if you want to, and they work fantastic. And of course, they're a very, very truthful emulation of the actual sort of analog gear. You cannot go wrong. So the black one and the blue one, fantastic. Black I use on like guitars and basses and stuff. Blue here I use on keyboards and vocals. This one's got a bit more top end to it, I guess. But done deal. Then there's this preamp here. This is the only preamp I actually use. This one right here. And it's fantastic. Another Black Rooster audio situation. There's not much to say. Basically, you can run your vocals through this guitar, especially cleans and stuff like that. When you're looking for a little extra sauciness, or you want to give it a bit more sort of a aggressive EQ profile, this thing is amazing. So the Omnitic 67A, fantastic plugin. And again, as far as vintage preamps go, there's this one. There is one other one, the Halloween edition V-Pre 73 by the same company. Sometimes they use it on a guitar, but I've been moving away from that because it's a little unruly. But still, you cannot go wrong with this one. It is so powerful, so versatile kind of deal. And you'd be surprised with just the 8 knobs there and a couple switches. You can go absolutely to town with the sculpting of the sound for your mix and whatnot. Next on the list here is, of course, the standard Pultec I have basically has two different plugins. I use this one on almost, well, not almost everything. I use it on a lot of different sort of whatever situations. Again, it's just your standard Pultec. You've heard it a million times, but this thing is amazing. Again, the low end boost and the high end boost on this thing are so pristine. I used to have the Waves one. I used to use Waves a lot, but I got very tired of their silliness. So that's when I got the Black Rooster one, because they're like, oh, here, have all of our plugins for $100. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. You can't go wrong. It's $100 and I'm getting like 15 plugins. So it's a no-brainer. And then I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised that their products are absolutely top-notch. Done. I've never had a problem ever with these, ever. And they're so faithful to the actual real deal that it's pretty amazing. Last but not least here, this is, again, part of the Black Rooster stuff, but I wanted to throw this one in. I know it's not analog, but I use this for sidechain compression. This, I have 25 compressors, and this is the only one I use for sidechain compression. So when I want to do sidechain compression on, you know, effects for the guitars or effects for the vocals and whatnot, this one is my go-to, and there it is, the end of the story. It's incredibly realistic, very smooth, very, very usable and user-friendly and whatnot. It's got, again, legs for days. This thing, you can just start driving it and dropping the output and stuff and dialing in the attack and release, and you'd be surprised at how precise this thing can actually get with just a few sort of knobs. And here's the thing. It took me a couple years to be able to learn how to use this thing, you know, properly, if you will, to really get the best results. And what I mean by that is this in conjunction with the effects and all the rest of that stuff to really get a decent sound. But ultimately, this is a big part of that sound, because without the dynamics control, you'll find that effects on your instruments and stuff and your vocals can just become an unruly mess. And then you're just standing there out in the wind, not having a good day kind of deal, right? So this is a fantastic plugin. I absolutely love it, and it works great too as just a standard compressor. But for me, obviously, with the other ones I have, which are more functionally usable, right, with the various selector switches and all the extra goodies on them, that's the only reason why they get used a lot more for the standard dynamics control than this one. But when it comes to just the sidechain compression, I find that this one is the smoothest and silkiest of all of them. So, fantastic stuff. Black Rooster Audio knocking it out of the park. Moving on now to the last section here, delays and reverbs. I guess we'll start at the bottom. Valhalla here, the Supermassive. This is a free plugin. This is on every single one of my mixes. This is one of the best plugins you can get, and it's free. Go get it right now. When I get money next year, because I've been saving up to buy a new computer so I can make better videos and a whole bunch of other good stuff. The fact of the matter is I'm going to buy their entire suite, and they have at least 3 or 4 plugins that are free. Maybe it's 2 or 3, but this is one of them. They have the Frequency Echo one, which is excellent. They have like a chorusing sort of flanger unit, which is also free. Fantastic. You can not ask for a better plugin. Really, you can't ask for a better plugin. This thing does everything. It has all the functionality you need and nothing more. I have other more expensive delays and stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is I keep coming back to this one because it just works. The end. And you will go watch any video on free gear or free plugins and stuff like this. Will be on every single list, and it deserves to be on every single list. This company is fantastic. This plugin is unrivaled. It is the best delay / reverb plugin that you can get for under $50, and in this case, totally free. That is a serious boss move. Next here is when I want to go to town and start creating some really crazy sounds with reverb and stuff. And of course, you can add a delay after this to sort of add that functionality. It's this bad boy here, Unfiltered Audio Silo. It looks absolutely ridiculous because it is. This thing is mental. Okay, so let's put it this way. You're going to spend a year or two just figuring out how to use this damn thing. Good times. But when you're talking about shaping otherworldly sounds and stuff like that, outside of using something like Paul Stretch, which is a great way to do it, but of course you have to record the audio first and then drag it into the Paul Stretch stuff, and then it does its thing. So there's several extra steps in there, and honestly, it has its uses too. When I just want to get going to town and create some really crazy out there sounds and stuff, which I've started to experiment with for my own sort of like return to the ambient sphere. I've been really messing around with this thing, and I'm realizing that I think I paid $20 for this. You will not find a better plugin to do like extreme levels of affecting, if you will, with respect to a particular instrument. When I don't want to go for the canned reverbs down here, and there are many of them, obviously, and there's a whole bunch, and they're all killer, by the way. When I really want to get in the weeds and I really want to start to tailor the sound, you won't find a better plugin. Or there's probably other ones that are like this, but honestly, this thing is so deep, so mental that it's like its own synthesizer. It's crazy. So, you know, buyer beware kind of situation. If you're not into the twiddling of the knobs and all the rest of that stuff, this may not be for you. But if you're one of these control freaks like me who wants total access on the mix and stuff to be able to do X, Y, and Z, you're good to go. And honestly, you can load the factory presets, of which there are many. And the thing is you get a pretty essentially a great idea about how to start to manipulate them and stuff like that. It just has so much depth and whatnot. And of course, there's all kinds of little help functions and stuff. It's a great plugin. Overall, it is incredibly good. Next on the list is my go-to. This is, I know you're going to be like, what? Yeah, this is like an 80s kind of reverb deal. So when I just looking for like rooms and plates and stuff like that, I use this. Now you can buy better ones, but I love the ducking function. I love this mono functionality where you can just drop that out of your mix altogether. And then the rest of it is just pretty much straightforward. I mean, there's no fuss, no muss. It's very straight up. And of course, once again, the ability to create different profiles and then use those as a selectable situation here. Again, you'll see one down here somewhere that's says settings or something like that. The truth of the matter is that that is an incredibly useful function. Okay, and Better Maker, the company that makes this, their plugins are killer, right? They have a whole bunch of them. So super good. Now listen, when I want to sort of like really dive deep into the reverb stuff with just the standard reverbs, I'm got these two from Black Rooster Audio. I have other ones too, Baby Audio, and the rest of this stuff. I find myself coming back to these again and again and again. This one is incredibly useful. It usually ends up as like the big super psycho reverb in the mix, as opposed to the stuff that I get in Valhalla. If I'm doing like a solo guitar thing like I did recently on the minimalist stuff, I'll use Valhalla. But if I'm using it in the context of a song, I'll use this one because there's just way more sort of like functionality kind of deal. So no complaints here. This is a killer plugin. And of course, I have another one too that's based around the spring situation. So there's the plate when I want a plate reverb, and here's the spring one. I'm still sort of learning, I guess you could say, when to use which one. But honestly, from some of the advice I've gotten, I've put the spring on, and I was like, what happens when you put the plate on? You know, that's a good methodology when you're sort of like getting into this stuff, to be like, ask questions and just go the opposite direction. And honestly, it's 50-50. Maybe that's just me, but it is what it is. Again, the Black Rooster Audio stuff, incredibly reasonably priced. They work, low CPU usage, and honestly, there's a ton of configuration here that you're just not going to find in other sort of reverbs at that level. You're going to spend at least $200 on a reverb, and a lot of those times, it's like a drop the menu down kind of situation and do that. I mean, there's these ones here, but you can make your own, and honestly, there's only so many settings you're going to use, and you're not going to find, realistically speaking, another plugin that has, you know, a more authentic sort of like analog sound. I've got lots of them. I find that some of them have these really weird digitized artifacts where you're just like, that sounds strange, but this thing just sounds like, you know, I played in bands for years, and I know every reverb there is with the Fender Twins and my own, which was in a 5150 and blah, 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 all the rest of this nonsense. The fact of the matter is you start to be able to easily recognize the sound of an authentic reverb versus something that is more like the Valhalla. This is more like an effecty reverb when you're into these reverbs, especially in the large and massive category. It's no longer about reverb. It's about essentially creating this digitized, synthesized version of reverb. So very interesting. But for the real deal, authentic stuff, you know, if I was doing rockabilly or somebody sent me one to do a mix of rockabilly or something else like that, I'm definitely reaching for one of these ones because they are so realistic. I'm just like, you can't tell. You honestly cannot tell. And the only limitation you're going to run into is the limitation that you have on yourself and your skill set with respect to that. And it just takes time and practice in the trenches, if you will, like playing guitar, to get good enough to be able to use these devices. They are plenty good enough to do anything, and they are absolutely pro grade. So those are my favorite plugins from all the big categories and stuff like that. I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for joining me on this special little, you know, pre-Christmas one. We'll be back with the guitar lessons tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to do. I'm still contemplating, but I'm leaning towards something with the blues. We haven't done that in a while, so I think we're going to do something with the blues kind of situation. I hope to see you all there. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.